You and Steven Spielberg reuniting for fifth Indiana Jones film in 2019. Is there anything we can say about Indy at this stage in his life and what he's up to?
No.
If you're like me and you're a huge fan of movies, you're probably fed up with the number of franchise films that have come out recently. You're tired of sequels, you're tired of reboots, you're tired of live-action remakes, you're done with it. What is going on with Hollywood? The problem with this industry is that it's more in the hype business than in the storytelling business. Hollywood is they're supposed to be storytellers. They're supposed to write interesting stories with interesting characters and interesting ideas, but they don't do that anymore. Movies have become like the Super Bowl, where they're more about the event and the hype around the event than the content itself. When people go to the Super Bowl parties, most aren't watching the game. They're there because everyone else is there. That's what movies have become. When a Marvel movie comes out or something like that, you go because everyone else is going and because it's very hyped up and it's everywhere and it's marketed everywhere. You can't avoid it. You go to the thing, you watch the movie, and you forget about it the next day. That's what the industry has become. Why is this happening? What's going on? After looking at it further myself, I don't think this is just a temporary problem. This isn't a born in the wrong generation rant. It's nothing like that. The reason movies are like this today is that the film industry is going through two enormous shifts right now. Two things that are changing the way the industry works. The first thing that's happening to this industry is the internet. Streaming, specifically, has completely killed the profitability of movies. It's impossible now to make a movie that's risky, that's kind of innovative, and also likely to make a profit. It's very difficult. Back then in the older, in the days before the internet, or when the internet was much younger, movies could make money from theatrical sales, or they could make money from, they could also have DVD sales and TV licensing. So theatrical, the movie theaters still exist, but DVDs, that's gone. TV licensing, no one watches TV anymore. That's gone. So these two giant forms of revenue don't exist anymore. And movies are much harder to make because of that. It's very hard to take a risk. And the thing that has replaced DVD and replaced television, which is internet streaming, things like Netflix, things like Disney Plus, is not profitable yet. Some of them are profitable, but many are not, some of these streaming platforms. That's the problem with the industry. And just to give you a quick statistic, cable television is 25 times more profitable than streaming right now, at least for Disney, for one specific company. Their cable television division is 25 times more profitable than Disney Plus and all their streaming services combined. And cable TV is dying. How streaming platforms have responded to this is they've really just, the only thing they can do is just raise prices. So they've tried that, but there's limits. You can only raise prices so much with the internet, with how much content is available for free and how much content you see on YouTube, how much you can pirate, whether it's legal or not. There's so much you can get for free. Without DVDs, with sales, without television, without all these other sources of income, what these studios have realized is they have to make a bulk of their money back during the theatrical release. So that's why the industry is hype-driven. It's marketing-driven. The strategy of these Hollywood films, these Hollywood studios now, is to drum up so much internet hype for a movie that it's a guaranteed hit in the opening night, that millions of people watch it, people flood to the box office, and then they make a huge amount of money in the opening night, and then hopefully that's enough to cover the costs. That's the strategy right now. They go on these internet marketing blitzes, these campaigns where they just take their movie and they plaster it everywhere. Every time one of these big franchise films or these Disney films is coming out, there's always a meme associated with that film or with that television show or whatever they're releasing. During the Mandalorian, right, there was the Baby Yoda meme. During Avengers, there's Avengers memes. There's these celebrities making appearances on every talk show, on every internet show. They're everywhere. They just go on this huge campaign to blanket the movie in every part of the internet, in every part of your life. There are Marvel characters now, Marvel ads on cereal boxes. They go crazy. They just put it everywhere. And so the idea is, if they drum up so much hype for these films before the opening weekend, a lot of people will know about it, a lot of people will show up to the theaters that day, and they'll just cash out hugely on the opening night before most people have even seen the movie and can even judge the quality. That's the way the industry works now. It wasn't like this a few decades ago. Some of your favorite movies today, some of the classics like Godfather and Shawshank Redemption, didn't have huge marketing budgets. They weren't well marketed at all, actually, and many of these movies were expected to fail. Before Godfather came out, the studio in charge of it, Paramount, they hated it. They thought the movie was horrible. They thought it would fail. They didn't market it too heavily. Ironically, the first Star Wars, the very first one from 1977, when it was a new idea, a fresh idea, and not a franchise, people thought it would fail. George Lucas thought it would fail hugely, and it only had a limited release. They didn't want to market it too much. They thought that it wouldn't be a successful movie. And yet, when these movies were released, Godfather and Star Wars and Shawshank, so many of these great films, they were so good that even without too much of a marketing budget, people came back to the theaters, lined up, told their friends about it, and huge amounts of people lined up to see these movies again, or to see them for the first time, because people were talking about it after they saw the movie, not before, from this internet marketing campaign. It was after they saw the movie that the hype, that the publicity started, when the buzz started for how great these movies are. That's how it used to work. It's reversed today. It happens before anyone's even seen it. The second thing the media industry in general is facing is getting very, very consolidated. There are a lot of monopolies now. There are only five studios, big production studios in the United States, that are in charge of, that control 80% of the film market. 5 studios that control 80%. That's huge. They're very powerful. I'm a free market guy. Let businesses do whatever they need to. I don't want to control them too much, but there's limits. There's limits to how much you can allow. These studios have gotten so powerful, they have so much market power, that they're using it to bully smaller theater chains. They use their market power to bully independent filmmakers. A company like Disney goes to independent small theater chains, and then they tell them, look, if you want a Disney movie from now on, if you want to stream, if you want Marvel or you want Star Wars, you have to show it in this many of your theater boxes for this many weeks. If you don't show it for this many weeks, we're not going to give you movies in the future. Now, if you're a person who owns a theater, a small business owner, you don't want to cut out Disney movies from you're going to go bankrupt. So they say, okay, fine. They accept their terms. And as a result of that, independent movies from these smaller studios don't have a chance to be in these theaters for as much time because Disney muscles them out. That's just one example. Every studio does this. The industry is rife with it. So these smaller independent creators are muscled out, and as a result of that, audiences have less variety. The only things that are showing are Marvel, Inside Out, Star. These are the only things that are showing, and the independent creators are cut out of it. They don't have a chance to do well. And now it's getting even worse because it's coming to a point where these major studios are not only muscling movie theaters, they're outright owning them. They're starting to acquire them. That used to be illegal. In the 1948, there was something called the Paramount Decrees, which made it illegal for movie studios to own the means of distributing movies, which were theaters back then. That's changing. Now these studios are acquiring theaters, so they can outright just straight up put their movies in there and cut out any competitors. It's going to seriously limit the variety of movies that are going to be available to people like you and me, to the audiences. Another problem with this is that giant companies, giant conglomerates, tend to be very risk averse. So in the movie world, what that means is they're not going to take creative risks. It's like this in every industry. Giant companies are very conservative. They're very stagnant. They just keep with what works. They don't take huge risks. It's usually the smaller players, the startups, the small studios that are more innovative. So if the industry is dominated, 80% of it, by these giant studios, and these giant companies don't innovate creatively, then that's going to be reflected in the movies you see. Just to give an example of this, there was a movie called, a very controversial movie, but a movie called Sound of Freedom. I'm sure you've heard of it. It was a big film, very controversial. It was going to be released in 2018 by 20th Century Fox, I believe. But that same year, Disney acquired that company, 20th Century, for this giant sum, $71 billion. It was a huge acquisition. They acquired it, they took Sound of Freedom, and they killed the movie. They shelved it, probably for political reasons, right? So Disney has certain political leanings. They like to avoid controversy, so they shelved the film. And what happened was the creators of Sound of Freedom had to buy back the rights to the movie and spend 5 years looking for a new company to distribute it, a very hard process. 5 years, or 4 years they had to do that. Finally, the movie was released, and it made huge amounts of money. It was a $250 million it made in the box office. So people wanted the film, right? It was supposed to be successful. People wanted it. It was a good movie. And yet, Disney came in and killed it because they're just that powerful. It's a monopoly. It's a very monopolistic industry now. That's what's going on now in Hollywood. It's the internet is killing creativity. Consolidation, these giant conglomerates, they are killing creativity. It's a broken industry. Just to drive home this point of how monopolistic this industry is, I want to contrast it with foreign markets, places like France, places like Korea, which are a lot less dominated by giant studios compared to the United States. They're a lot more fragmented. There's a lot more small independent studios. There's a lot of rules that countries like France and Korea have of quotas for movies made by big studios in theaters. They try to have a diversity of content. These kinds of countries that have this system in place, in the past few years, they've consistently made the best movies. If you think about Korea, there was Parasite, there was Past Lives, right? If you think about France, there was Anatomy of a Fall, there was Portrait of a Lady on Fire. These foreign markets, in this environment, these foreign markets are the big innovators today, not America. We're not the ones who are innovating. Hollywood is just pumping out the same generic crap again and again, hoping that it pulls in an easy $1 billion in the box office. Nothing innovative, nothing creative. That's happening outside, in South Korea, in France, in other countries. That's what's going on now, because this industry is full of giants that don't want to do anything. I want to end on a positive note by looking at the history of the movie industry. It wasn't always like this, and there were times in the past when Hollywood, when movies were in danger, and yet the industry still survived and it did well. Take a look at the 1950s when television was becoming big, a big part of American people's lives. Before television, around 90 million people a year, 90 million people a week went to the movie theaters to see films, because that was the only entertainment that was available to them. There was no internet, there was no TV, there was no iPhones, so everybody went to the movies in the 40s. After the TV came along, this number plummeted, and movies weren't making as much money anymore. So this is analogous to what's happening with streaming, right? Streaming is this big disruptive technology that's making people less willing to buy DVDs and less willing to watch TV. So back then, there was this technological innovation, the television, which messed up the movie industry. And what happened was the studios decided to put on these big spectacles, these big spectacle epic films with a lot of effects and a lot of a huge cast to bring audiences back to the box office. And that didn't work so well. What ended up saving the movie industry from television was in the late 60s and early 70s, a group of directors came along and completely reinvented the industry. It was called New Hollywood. And these directors were people like Coppola, who directed Godfather, people like Steven Spielberg, people like George Lucas. These directors created such interesting, unique movies that people had no choice but to go to the theaters and watch them. And that's what saved the industry. That's what has to happen now. Hollywood needs to go back to the basics. They need to go back to the fundamentals. And they need to just make good stories again. Once you do that, once you make good movies and you make good stories, good characters, just get the basics right, people will come back and see the movies. And they will see it on streaming platforms. They're not going to pirate. They're not going to do other things. They're going to come back. They're going to pay for these movies. They're going to go to the theaters. It's already happening now with these French and the Korean films that I mentioned. They were very successful in the box office. They did very well. There was a recent one, The Substance, which was co-produced with studios in France and England. It did very well in the box office. People are talking about it a lot. So if you make a good movie, just with the basics, the story, the character, if you do that, it'll do well. People will buy it. People will watch it. You need to get back to the basics.